My aunt gave 22 minutes and I gave her a kid. So, that was a little chaotic. As Howard said, I wake up at 2 o'clock every day. Run off to some ridiculous place before the sun comes up to report on whatever the big story of the day is. I never know where I'll end up every morning, and I love every second of that. As a reporter, obviously, our personal experiences shape who we are and how we see the world. For being a living kidney donor, I guess, I see the triumph of the human spirit, of science, and of the human body. And think about what everyone in this room went through. It really is mind-blowing. And it's really special hearing, just talking to Howard for a little bit here, and hearing all the stories in this room. To be the one up here to talk really is an unbelievable honor. But when you think about transplants and kidney transplants, as my cousin, my recipient's daughter, Julie, said a couple months after the surgery, I still can't grasp the fact that my cousin only has 1 kidney, and now my mom has 3. So we did our transplant on February 27, 2006, so it's almost 7 years to the day, and because my life is so normal now, it's almost easy to forget how incredible it is. But when you really stop and think about it, it is amazing. And to be up here today sharing my story with all of you is just so special to me. It's an honor, really, I can't put into words. My recipient, my Aunt Jean, always said, you can't ask somebody to give you a kidney. You can't ask. People need to offer it. And every single donor in this room had the courage, the love, and the desire to make a difference. As a living donor, there aren't words to explain how it feels to see the difference we make. But what everybody in this room has done is so special. Now Jean, my recipient, can't be here today because she's on a 3-week trip to Australia, which includes a cruise to New Zealand. Which means now I'm part of the group that has to be a very small group of people who can say, one of my kidneys has crossed the equator. But it's amazing to see my gift of the years, to see Aunt Jean and her husband, my Uncle Luke, love to travel. And I know that thanks to me, thanks to the gift of life, thanks to the donor programs, she can do whatever she wants. And Jean has polycystic kidney disease, PKD. She was diagnosed in 1998. By 2005, her kidneys were shutting down. The goal was to have her a new kidney before she needed dialysis, but it didn't work out that way. When she went on dialysis, she had a catheter, and I have to admit that once I was picked as a donor, I showed up for the appointments when they told me to. I did what I had to do. I gave blood when I had to, EKG tests and everything. I never learned all these terms, or really what dialysis was all about, until after I donated. And if there are any other donors here like me to explain, the catheter pretty much plugs the person into the dialysis machine. And Jean's plugged right into an artery and a vein in her chest. And they usually try to fuse the vein and an artery in dialysis patients in the arm to make it a little easier. That didn't work for Jean, and that surgery ended up just being another layer of misery in what was a lot of pain. And with the catheter in the chest, there were serious concerns because it's so close to the heart that if it were to get infected, it would be deadly. So Jean's transplant time frame had to be sped up. But for her blood type, as Howard mentioned, the wait list was 5 years. And even in an ideal situation, 5 years of dialysis is torture. It's a wonderful, life-saving technology. But as many of you in this room can attest, it's a special kind of torture. And it's one of those things people may not realize until they have to go through it. It got so bad for Jean that her boss actually got a cot for her at her work so she could sleep during the day because she just had to take naps. Her body was just shut down. And before that, before he got the cot in the office, she'd have to go out to her car to take naps. But even with all that going on, Jean still managed to brighten up her dialysis center. And I wish she could be here today so that she could tell these stories and you could meet her because she's always so happy and upbeat. And I joke that it's almost to the point of being annoying. But even at her lowest time, feeling awful, run down, she'd make others smile. She brought cupcakes to dialysis, and they all had nicknames for each other. But again, the dialysis wasn't working, so she needed a transplant. Now, Jean's husband, Lou, wanted to do, but he wasn't the right blood type. Jean has 2 sisters, my mom, sitting right over there, And another sister was in Mexico. All my family. Great places and they moved here. They were first up to be donors, but for various reasons, the hospital at the University of Pennsylvania decided they weren't viable candidates. Jean's two kids couldn't give because PKD is hereditary, and they both had a 50-50-50 shot of having it. Before the new insurance laws, if they got tested and it turned out they had PKD, they'd run the risk of having a pre-existing condition and not being able to get coverage. So after several months, Jean's back at square one, in need of a donor, her immediate family ruled out. And as she said, you can't ask someone to donate a kidney. But once word got out that Jean needed a kidney, 5 of us volunteered. She had 5 people, including a coworker. And it was pretty funny. Her husband, Lou, pointed out, think how many coworkers you have who'd be willing to give you $5, let alone go and give a kidney. But that's Jean. And there we were, 5 of us, down at the hospital at the University of Pennsylvania to get tested. And I first mentioned to Jean in passing, almost joking, that I'd donate. I guess it was about a year and a half before the actual surgery. We were up at a Penn State game, and we were at a tailgate, and I said it kind of joking. I really never thought it would happen. Well, we went down, gave blood, went through all the tests, and then waited to see if we were matches. I got the call a few days later, and I was lucky. I was the first one they called, and they said, well, that was a match. Sort of an awkward call because I hadn't really thought much beyond the initial testing. I mean, I wanted to do it. But here I was on the phone about it, and I asked if anyone else matched, and they said we all did. So we went from not having anyone to now having 5 of us. But again, fortunately for me, I believe now, I was lucky that I was the first one they called, and I said I'd do it. And I always joke that I had the easy part during the surgery because I was asleep the whole time. They all had to sit in the waiting room and wait for the news about the surgery. But when we look back at it later, Jean and I would talk about going into the prep room before surgery and the emotions. And that's, when it really all becomes real right before you go into that room. It was hard on me simply because of the stress of surgery. What I didn't realize at the time is it's even harder on Jean. Because not only is she going into surgery, she also has to worry about me, about what she's putting me through. And after the surgery, when I saw the incision for the first time, I remember being disappointed. Because I met with the surgeon, Dr. Ali Naji in Penn, several times before the transplant, and I told him, I want the ugliest, nastiest scar. I mean, I want zigzags, needle marks. I pictured like a scene from Jaws where they're sitting at the table in the cabin, and they're comparing scars. I would be able to lift up my shirt and be like, people would be like, oh, man, what's the scar from? But instead of nasty stitches, I wake up to find out they used glue. You can't really see it. There's no hole, nothing. You can't really see it. So it's disappointing. It doesn't mean I don't still show it to people. My mom's told me several times that people don't want to see your scar. After the surgery, Jean and I were on the same floor for recovery, and I remember every time I walked over there lugging my pee bag around. She always had someone in the room with this big binder, just going over all the stuff she had to do now. And it was like when you buy a new car and you go over all the features. But it seemed like every time I went over there, she was in that class. And I asked Jean for this. She sent me some notes, and I asked her what she remembers about being in the hospital after the surgery. I'll read you what she wrote, because I'm sure many of us have the same experience. She said, memories of walking the hall post-transplant to get everything going correctly. Of course, carting our poles with all the bags and the tubes attached. We gave each other encouragement and humor as we walked past the nurse's desk countless times for days, walking in circles. Thank goodness they had us wear 2 hospital gowns, so we didn't have to worry about it. Going through the process before the surgery, I remember talking to the doctors about life after the transplant. I assumed there would be changes and was shocked to learn differently that really no diet changes or lifestyle changes were necessary. Contact sports were out, and that ended my dream of being an MMA fighter. Here, getting punched in the face. But even though no serious changes were necessary, my lifestyle's changed drastically. A coworker once asked me how I quit smoking. I said, oh, I couldn't even kid it. He gave me a funny look and walked away. I'm not sure. I weighed about 145 pounds before the surgery. Afterwards, I started swimming again for the first time in about 13 or 14 years. That eventually evolved into triathlons, swimming, biking, and running. And last summer, I did my first Ironman in Lake Placid, a 2.4-mile swim, 112-mile bike, and a 26.2-mile run. It took me 13 hours and 52 minutes, and in Lake Placid, you finish on the speed skating oval from the 1980 Olympics. And as you come across the line, it's the coolest thing. They say your name, and they'll say, Jim Melwert, 37-year-old from Collegeville, Pennsylvania. You're an Iron Man. And then for me, I mean, that's amazing to hear itself, but then for me, they have a little thing before the race where you fill out notes about yourself. And as I'm coming across the line, the guy says, back in 2006, Jim donated a kidney to his aunt. I can't put into words how awesome that was, to come across that line and hear that. And while every donor in this room did what we did for our recipient, whether we realized it or not at the time, we also did this for ourselves. And I guess that brings me to what I learned from all this. My dad died of cancer when I was a teenager. He was only 47 years old. And I couldn't do anything but watch as he was doing it. My sister was killed in a car accident. She was in her 20s again. I was helpless. When Jean got sick, once her kidneys really started slowing down, she did her best though. She always tried to hide it. She kept going. She always stayed positive. I never once heard her complain. But you could see that she was wearing down. And to be able to do something, to be able to be the one that got her back up. I remember the first time she was allowed out of the house after the transplant. It was the end of February when we had the surgeries, and in April of that year, she was allowed to go to Easter dinner with the family. And even then, just months after the surgery, I could see that she was already back to her old, kind of doing something. Glad you laughed. So to be able to help like that, obviously, is a big deal to me, but more importantly to me, is you always hear people who beat cancer or other serious diseases. You hear them talk about what they call their second chance that they feel they got. It's about not taking things for granted, about getting out there and doing the things they always wanted to do. And that's kind of what I got out of this. And all things considered, I had to go through a lot less suffering to get there. A lot of what I learned about myself came during Ironman training. On Saturdays and Sundays last year, I'd go out for 6-hour bike rides and 3-hour runs. When you're out there by yourself, you get a lot of time to think. And I want to share the biggest lesson of what I learned. I get overwhelmed sometimes during that training. I'd start thinking about how crazy it was to do this with one kidney. I mean, how could I go swim for 2 miles and hop on a bike for 112 miles, ride through the mountains of Lake Placid, and then go run a marathon? It was crazy. I'd get scared. I was almost petrified that I wouldn't be able to finish. And I started thinking, what if I put in all this work? My friends and family went out there to watch me and I couldn't finish. And then one day I was out on one of those long rides and I had my epiphany. I realized, so what if I don't finish? I mean, of course I'd be disappointed, but so what? I was trying. That was the important thing. And while it sounds so cliche, it's something we've almost come to accept as fact, that failure is not an option. You hear that all the time, failure is not an option. And while of course there are things where that is true, sometimes we get so worried about failure that it keeps us from even trying. And that's far worse than any failure. The reality is no one wants to fail. But once you accept that it is an option, and it's okay if you fail, that you can get up and dust yourself off and go try again. Once you accept that, it suddenly becomes so much easier to take on life's greatest challenges. And that's where you really learn about yourself. And that's the life I've created since my donation. I've learned to get over that fear of failure. And so much of that credit has to be given to being part of the gift of life. And I'll close with a couple thoughts in my head. Again, I asked her to send me some thoughts, and these are direct quotes from her. I'll read what she wrote. After almost dying, I've traveled extensively with my new kidney. I go to the gym daily, and my phone alarm is set for 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. Everyone knows it. Family, friends, etc. And they always remind me when they hear it. Did you take your meds? She says, life donation is not just between the donor and the recipient. It's about total family support, a special relationship shared forever. I love the gift of life and all the information it gives to all of us. Living donation is a miracle and a very special gift. And she closes by saying, because of James, I'm able to take a long and faraway vacation to Australia and New Zealand and enjoy every bit of it. And it's amazing to hear that. And again, thank you so much.